Well, my goodness, friends, look at you, Carrie, Andy. Good to see some cameras on. It's great to see you all. Hope you are safe and well. And people still filing in. This is amazing. Happy New Year. I think I'm still allowed to say that to some degree. Like another day or two, like maybe February. I haven't seen all of you in a while, so I'll stop February 1st. I'm not going to do it after that. There's Doris. Good to see you, friend. Donna, hello. Look at that. Look at all these folks. So good to see you, Brooke, up in lovely upstate New York. Good to see you, friend. So we are remarkably honored to have a dear friend. Look at you. Why don't you do that? And Molly, perfectly put. Well, congratulations, Dr. Coates. So if you want to say hi in chat, say where you're from, maybe your company, where you live, what you're doing. This is our first kickoff of the Alumni in 2022. That's really spectacular. We have so many exciting things to share. A couple announcements. I'm going to embarrass Brooke Thomas Record. I see you're smiling there. I don't know if you all know, but we have been blessed to have that remarkable young lady join our company. Brooke is now a part of Applied Synergies. Many of you may know her from her remarkable role with the Maisie folks and Elliot. She was just tremendous there. We're so fortunate to have her within our company. She's going to play in some ways a very similar role. She's going to be part of care and feeding and growing this program because she's so remarkable at that side of things. So we can't wait. We're going to come out with you with a whole bunch of new stuff that we are so excited about, elevating the alumni and doing the best we can to support you on the journey. And one of those incredible things is that we get to bring people like Dr. Coates to you. Look at her smiling. I don't know if you may know, you might want to do a big shout out in chat or open your mic. She just finished her dissertation for her PhD. And we're so fortunate to have her sharing that with us here as she's finally able to share this remarkable research. So Katie, we want to say congratulations. Thank you so much. And we so appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Bob. And hi, everyone. And thanks for taking time to spend with me. I'm pretty excited to share this with you and would love your take on it as well. So this is all about what I discovered in my dissertation, which is on the adoption of performance support. And we will talk about kind of how organizations can think about performance support to solve a broad range of problems, performance challenges, the best practices, lessons learned, techniques, things that I uncovered in the themes of my research, and a change model. And I guess I should back up and tell you who I am. I mean, you know, I'm a Bob told you I just finished my dissertation, but I'm also a director of learning at McKinsey & Company, where I look out for about 18,000 professionals. A lot of our kind of traditional organizations like IT, talent, people recruiting, those places, but also some groups that provide support services to our consultants. I've been in the L&D world for around 30 years. Yeah, I started when I was 12. So yeah, when I say that, I'm just like, and I've had a number of different roles, from like instructional designer, I started on the floor, to kind of leading the strategy for many different populations. But I really got into this performance support world a few years ago, and working on some projects that really got me interested in learning more. And at the time that I was in my PhD program and I had to pick a topic to focus on, I wanted to study performance support.
So Katie, if I can jump in real quick. Yeah, so friends, obviously Katie is a part of the alumni. So the conversation can follow up with this. We'll post the recording of this and things on the alumni site. But Katie also did a podcast for us on that remarkable work she did in and award-winning, by the way, work that she did. And one of our favorite parts about performance support is the measurability of these things, because it actually lives in the world of work. So that's all. If you're trying to put a case together and want to see a remarkable example of some pretty staggering ROI for the implementation of this kind of stuff, please track down the podcast. We can post that in the Teams as well, so you can listen in on that too if you want to give a listen to there. So Katie, you are on.
Yeah, and this is kind of an overview of that. The podcast will go into a lot more detail, but basically I was called in to look at a performance challenge. We had an audience these are business presentation specialists. And what happens, we're a consulting firm. Our consultants are working with clients on wicked problems. The deliverables that they produce are PowerPoint presentations or documents or placemats, things like that. We want them to focus on the problem solving, and we have these business presentation specialists behind the scene that create the decks, the materials for them. And it might sound like it's easy, like it's just PowerPoint, but McKinsey's version of PowerPoint is very, very different. It's been changed, and then they also have to understand the consulting lingo. So it's a pretty challenging role. And it's a hard role to recruit for because there's nothing really like it out there. So these folks, we'd hire them, and it was taking them a really long time to become independent. And they tried many different things and nothing worked. So they asked me to take a look at it. And we got in there. And the goal really was to get that 18 to 24 months down to 9 to 12 months, was what they'd really asked me and my team to do. And what we did is we totally restructured the onboarding. And the old way of onboarding for them, it was very topic based. So like the first week they'd come in and they'd learn the McKinsey PowerPoint. And the second week they would learn some graphic design techniques. So they were doing it by topic. We kind of threw that out and changed it to where the first day in training, they started working on jobs. So we started, very simple. And then we kind of provided scaffolding, and we layered and built the complexity of work over time, but they were learning it in the context of the flow of the work. And we gave them a digital coach, a performance support solution that they had with them in the onboarding, and they got used to working with it. It was totally integrated and embedded in the program. And when they went out onto the floor, they actually took the coach with them, and they had that available to them. And then we worked closely with all the operations folks, because there's a really sophisticated operational layer around this in terms of intake of work from the consultants and how they sort and give the work out to people, and capacity and measurement and all that. So we worked with the ops team, who that ops team loved us by the end of this project. And then just to clarify, what the way I define performance support, and I'm preaching to the choir here because you guys know this, but when I talk to others, I always put this out there. This is our favorite definition. This is what we talk about. It's that integrated set of support, right? And it's, guidance, advice, assistance, organized and designed. It's not just thrown into a box folder. It's organized and designed that allows people to perform high level of performance with a minimal support of others. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about performance support. The impact of this, that Bob, we were just thrilled, and you can take a look at this. So before our implementation, it took 30 days of training, and we got that down to 20 days. We covered 6 to 7, as I said, high level topics, and we were able to get in 17 to 20 different topics within that 20 days. So it was much more efficient in the way we did it. When they left the training, they were able to do a much higher level of complexity of work compared to the old way. Productivity points is a measurement. So when a job is sent in, an intake specialist looks at it and says, okay, this is 2 pages and it's really simple, so it's 1 productivity point. Whereas this is 10 pages, it's kind of, there's some complexity here, so it's 5 productivity points, right? So in the old days, when they just finished training, they could only do 10 to 12 productivity points a day, and we were able to bring that up to 18. So again, efficiency and capacity plays a role here. And then we've really gotten it down to 6 to 9 months. So we exceeded our goal. And then the ops team estimated that we were able to free up capacity for additional work by 25 to 30%. So it was a really compelling project with a compelling set of data. And I'm like looking at this, and I like many of us, I had learned about performance support in school, and I knew Gary from conferences and things like that. But this like really propelled me into the world, and I'm like, why aren't we not hearing more about this? And I started looking at research, and there was a survey in 2018, and only 21% of the organizations surveyed were even looking at this. And I'm like, okay, I'm confused. I don't know if you can get these kinds of results. And I'd started interacting with folks in our community and our network, and talking to folks, and I'm like, if this is so great, why aren't more people doing it? So that's what I really wanted to hone in on it. And I chose to do that by really exploring kind of events and experiences that lead learning and development professionals to adopt and implement performance support in their organizations. So that's what I was focusing on. So when I say adoption, I'm not talking about the end user at the end of the world, but I'm talking about that upfront. How do leaders learn about it? You know, where do they learn about performance support? How do they define it? How are they using it? What was that first project like? What were things that happened that really kind of supported adoption and implementation? So that's what I was really interested in and really honed in on. One of the first things you do after you define your question is really start to scan the literature, because you're starting to build an argument around your study, and you have to look at the literature to support that argument. And there were 4 content areas that I really focused on, and one was kind of the current state of work and learning and development. Josh Berson's known, he has a lot of great stuff out there. Schwab, has written the book around the 4th Industrial Revolution, around kind of the current state of work. And our friend Nick Van Dam has done quite a bit of work. So they were kind of some of the key people that I'd looked at. And then, of course, learning theory. Why are we doing this? What's the benefit, the advantages of doing this? So, you'll recognize a lot of those names. Ruth Clark, cognitive load. She and Sweller have done a lot of work in that space. Our friend Ebbinghaus and his work on memory, and then Grossman and Salas have published quite a bit of academic literature on transfer of training. So I focus in on those. And then, of course, performance support. And I will say there's not a lot of rigorous research out there, which is one of the things that we need to work on. And I'm committed to being part of that. Lots of great, there's a lot of books. There's a lot of great anecdotes and stories and things like that. But I think we need to get in on kind of really rigorous research. Friends Con and Bob are riddled in my dissertation. They show up everywhere. Gloria Geary, and then, of course, our friend Frank Wynn, who has done, his dissertation was also on performance support, and he's published quite a bit. He's done a lot of rigorous looking at, the effectiveness of performance support, comparing it to classroom learning, e-learning, looking at the integration of performance support in the systems or outside of the work. So he's done quite a bit of research. And then finally, since this is about adoption, I had to really dig into the adoption and diffusion of innovation literature. So Everett Rogers is key in that area. Surrey's done a lot of work on adoption and learning technologies. And then Wisdom et al. Had a really nice framework that I leveraged for the research. So that's kind of the scope of the research that I looked at to kind of build my case.
Katie, there's a question around getting access to your research to read your work.
So my dissertation is in a final process at the university where it's being edited. So somebody's looking at it right now and doing a proofread to make it available for publishing. As soon as I'm allowed to publish it, then I can share it. And I'd be happy to, if anyone's, you might, this is a dissertation, guys. It's not but if anyone really wants to read it, I'd be happy to send it to you. Just send me an email, and I'll give you that information at the end, and I'd be happy to share it with you. And if you want to talk about it again, I love talking about it. So
excellent. Thanks, Kate. Thanks.
Sure. So how did I do this? So you just kind of understand the research approach. Given this was about adoption and really understanding decisions and things that leaders did in the process, I did a qualitative study. I really wanted to get rich description from the participants, stories, definitions, those kinds of things. So it's a qualitative study. Given that, participant selection was really critical. So I used purposeful sampling. So I looked for in my network, I looked for L&D leaders that were, seasoned L&D leaders, had implemented at least one performance support solution. And it didn't have to be perfect solution. They could have had lessons learned, but they had to have implemented one performance support solution. I did 75-minute semi-structured interviews via Zoom. And that included questions like, okay, tell me how you got started with performance support. Tell me how you define it. Tell me about your first project. Tell me what worked, what didn't work. So it's very kind of open-ended to try to collect this description from them. And then I had each interview transcribed by a service called rev.com. And when I got the transcription back, I compared it to the Zoom to make sure that it was accurate. And then I uploaded all of those transcriptions into a software package called Deduce that you use for qualitative analysis. So that was about 500 pages of text. And then I did a thematic analysis where I actually went word by word, line by line, and I looked for the themes that showed up across all of the data, across all interviews. So there were 17 organizations that participated, 17 interviews. And that's how I did that. And then what you do is you call those themes out and you organize them. And then the ones that you present in your research, for me, they had to be the same kind of theme had to be mentioned by at least 12 participants. I would say most of the ones included here were mentioned by 15 to 17 of the participants. So that's you just use prevalence to decide what's important when you report out on your research. So that was the process. To give you a sense, we had a beautiful mix of participants, and I can tell you in this community, there's a confidentiality around this. I can't share names of the folks that participated, but they were incredibly, every single person I asked to participate wanted to do it, and they gave of their time freely, and they really care about this as much as we all do. And there were 11 different industries represented, so really nice mix. And you can see example titles of these folks. So we had, again, a great mix of folks, very seasoned people, and who had a lot of experience and a lot of passion to share. So I will say that. And if any of my participants are on the call now, I would say, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I did put you guys in my acknowledgments in my dissertation. You'll see, I thank my participants for the great information that they shared. So let's get into the results a bit. So one thing I really wanted to tackle, because I do think it's a challenge, is there's still a lot of kind of misinformation or myths around what performance support is and what it can do. People still believe that it's something that's embedded in Salesforce, and that's the only thing you can use this type of performance support for, right? And that is a use case, and that's a very important use case, but obviously it's not the only thing. So I think there were 36 examples of how performance support is being used across these 17 organizations, and then I tried to synthesize that into buckets. And here were the buckets, and you'll see maybe some of these will resonate with you. But again, consistent work processes to increase efficiency and quality, huge. The increasing time to competency, supporting time to competency. There were some that were using performance support for, all kinds of process work. So there was one on a people leadership hub for basically, how do I hire someone? How do I develop them? How do I evaluate them? How do I handle kind of challenging personnel situations, right? And so there's a performance support solution for that. So all different types of content. And I'm not going to read all of these to you, but you can see, again, I think coming out of this, we can see that performance support can be used to solve an array of challenges. And we need to get the word out that that's the case. And then here's the meaty part. So these are the themes that I uncovered in my work. So there's 14 of them here, and I bucketed them against a framework. So I talked about Wisdom's adoption framework. She was doing the same thing in a psychology, in a kind of mental health capacity, looking for how to adopt best practices in mental health. And she scanned the literature around adoption decision making, which is the same kind of thing I was doing, and found that these are the 4 key buckets. There's organizational influences, there's influences about the innovation itself, so about performance support itself. There's a lot around the individuals involved. In our case, it was a lot about the learning leaders and the teams that were involved. And then there were some unforeseen or external things that showed up as well that influenced performance support. So that's how I categorized the themes. And I'm not going to go blow by blow because that would really bore you, I think. But what I tried to do is, in the next few pages, synthesize some things that I thought were really interesting and useful. So first thing we're going to talk about is shifting mindsets. And this still comes up. So there was a lot about the shared values and culture of the organization, right? So is your organization open to performance support, or is it really locked in a formal learning kind of mindset? We face that too in McKinsey. In-person learning, people really value it, so it's really hard to kind of shift. And I'm out there kind of evangelizing, guys, you have way too much to learn, and there's no way you could step away from your projects and go to an in-person learning for everything that you need, right? So we've got to shift the mindsets. And one of the quotes was, there's learning organizations that just are not wired yet to embrace it. And how do we tackle that? And a lot of that has to do with the other two categories here around attitudes and motivation and awareness and skill levels. And so the attitudes and motivation showed up quite a bit from the conversations around the learning team, right? There was some conversations about instructional designers. In some cases, the instructional designers latched onto this and loved it and were really engaged. And there were other cases where they just love building learning experiences. So it was really hard for them. It was just about, I don't want to do that because I like building classroom learning, right? So there's all this work that has to be done in terms of the learning team, both in some cases the instructional design part of the house, and then in other cases with the facilitators. And facilitators came up as kind of the hardest audience. That several people said they are the hardest audience to shift because they're threatened, that they feel like they're going to lose their job. Whereas if they really embraced it, it actually helps them with their job. And we saw that with the visual graphics project that we did. We included the trainers in the process, the design process, and that really helped them see the value, and that their role was shifting more of a coaching and guiding than a kind of sage on the stage. And they actually really liked it better. But that comes up as something that we have to address. And then awareness and skill levels, it's still helping the learning organization understand what this is. And how do we do that? I mean, if you go to conferences, you find Bob and Con, you go to their presentation, we need to do more of that. We need to get out there more and help L&D, L&D organizations really start to understand kind of this whole notion of performance first and performance support mindset, and how to build that into their learning strategy. It's really, again, like I said, I just don't believe, with the way that the world is changing and the way the world of work is changing, formal learning cannot support all of the needs. And so there has to be this introduction of performance first and performance support into organizations. So that was what I learned in the shifting mindsets. And then kind of making the case for performance support, how to do it, how to get in there. And I was a little surprised at what the emphasis was on the learning leader's ability to influence here. This came up across many dimensions in here. And it was really understanding performance support, being able to talk about it in the right way to leaders. So part of that was the language that we used. And I mean, this was a funny conversation I had with someone, and he's like, I'm trying to talk about this, and I had a leader just tell me I was being really pedantic. And he's like, I was shocked. I was really shocked, because here I am, I'm talking about, performance first and all that. And he's like, don't talk to me in that language. You got to tell me what it means to me from a business perspective. And he said that was a pivotal moment. Another very senior person that I talked to, he's working with his business leaders now to try to understand it. And he's like, okay, I've got to get these guys a primer. They're asking me for a primer. So he put together what he thought was a great primer. It was 20 pages. His team looked at it and said, dude, you can't share that with them. It's still too technical. And he said it took a while for him to come up with 4 pages that really kind of got the essence. So it was pretty clear, to really influence across the space, you've got to figure out your leaders and what's the sweet spot in talking with them, and be really focused on kind of the business drivers and the business benefits of this, which kind of flows into the demonstrated cost benefit. Like, that's about the performance support solution that you're implementing, right? And one example, in the past, in this very large organization, they were still printing and shipping manuals, right? And it cost $700,000 a year. Think about that, just to ship the manuals. And then, $1 million to update some of the supportive e-learning that because it changed all the time, and the tools that they were building the e-learning in, it cost that much to make the changes. So when he took a step back and, he was convincing them that we should shift into this performance support mode, he would go in there with, this is the upfront cost. It's going to, it is going to cost us to change this, But in terms of the shipping and maintenance and all of that, this all happens on the back end with this system, and it's done once and everybody has access to it. It was a no-brainer. And then he said he coupled that with some qualitative benefits as well, and it was just an easy sell to his business leaders. And then we all know, this is kind of standard, you got to have leadership champions, right? You got to find those leaders as you're getting started in this. Find the leaders that are willing to, that'll work with you. You know, we've all got those people that we can talk to, we trust. It's important to find those leadership champions. And that kind of flows into kind of, so here's some things around the implementation that came up. This ability to experiment and show success. And everyone talked about this and how important that was. And that ties with kind of finding the right leader who's willing to take a risk with you, and kind of start something and pilot something. And, you know, some people said you might be tempted to go after the biggest thing first, but actually that might not be the best place to start. Start with something that is kind of smaller, medium-sized risk, for a willing customer, one of those leaders who's willing to take a little bit of a risk with you, and learn from it, learn in the process. And so, you know, dig into that and you know, and then show success from that. Or if it fails, it's really not a failure. It's one of those things where you learn from what happened, and on your next project, you can apply those lessons learned. So again, this is that whole crawl, walk, run notion. And in some organizations, it's interesting. In some organizations, it does take time. I mean, I can see that in McKinsey, it is taking time to show and demonstrate it. And then in other organizations, I mean, we have a hospital where they did the first project and then it took off like wildfire, and they weren't even prepared for that. And they had to take a step back and put governance and things in place. So, you know, it depends on the organization, but I'd go into it with the mindset of crawl, walk, run, experiment, show success, and then see how it progresses from there. And then resource availability, making sure that you have access to subject matter experts, business matter experts. You have to think about maintenance even when you get started, because maintenance of this is really important. So who's going to maintain it? Is it going to sit in the learning organization, or is it going to sit within the business that is owning the solution? And there was lots of conversation about what's the right approach there and how to do that. But the point is, you need to make sure that you have the right resources. IT came up there. You know, do you have the right IT folks involved? Is it going through the right process? So resources are really important. And then also the network for implementation. I mean, having help. Don't think you can go this alone and it's going to be successful, right? There were leaders that before they started, they talked to 10 different, you know, colleagues about their experiences to learn from that. You know, you can work with folks like Apply Synergies and you know, some of the vendors who are doing this. There are resources out there who have had experience with this who can help you. So it's important to consider that as you're planning. And then the last piece that came up, there's a quote from somebody around, you know, he said he really could not have done it without having the vendor support that he had. Just, you know, couldn't have done it. Yeah, you have to get some help from those who have had experiences. And then the last piece was around targeted training and communication. So lots of conversations around kind of embedding the performance support in training, kind of like I talked about we did with the visual graphics project that we worked on, and how that was a lot more successful than trying to just, you know, bolt something on. So targeted training was really important in terms of rolling it out. And then how you communicated, your communications plan, the marketing plan, and lots of great conversations and fun conversations around branding and the benefits of that. You know, My Help, Navigator, GPS, Digital Coach, kind of giving it some sort of name and using that to drive people to that one place for performance support made a big difference in terms of getting people into the system. So those were just some highlights of things. These were incredibly interesting stories that I learned. The COVID actually had, you know, there's some interesting things that happened as a result of COVID. And in the first example, this was a hospital who they had heard about performance support from a conference and they were excited about it, but they could never bring it in. It just wasn't happening. There wasn't the time, there wasn't the resources, there wasn't the push for that. But then in the middle of COVID, they had to move nurses from one ward to the ICU to support COVID, and they had no other way of training these people. They had they had the fundamental skills, but there were some differences in terms of equipment or the way that they charted people. That just, there were some different activities that they had to understand. And so the learning manager said, we need to do this now. And basically they pulled in external support, and in 10 days, they were able to build, they had no systems in place. They had no way of, they hadn't figured out how they were going to get this out there, what they were going to do. But in 10 days, they figured that out and stood up their first performance support solution for these nurses. And it was a tremendous success. And now, they've had doctors coming to them saying, when do we get this? And they're trying to work through those processes. So it really did springboard them into performance support. And then the second example, this was a clear, where business continuity paid off. They had performance support in place. This was a large organization that had many lines of business. They had a travel line of business. Because of COVID, obviously the travel, basically stopped, and they had all of these representatives, these agents. And so what are they going to do with them? Because they have performance support in place, they already had customer service skills. They just needed the product knowledge. So they were able to kind of move these folks into other areas for coverage, and people didn't lose their job. And the performance support solution was key to that business decision. So I just think that is an amazing example of why you need to think about this, even for business continuity reasons. So that was a lot, and I learned a lot. The overall themes, I would say, performance support works. Lots of great examples. It can be used to solve many performance challenges. Many factors to consider as you implement it, from the organizational level, from the innovation itself or performance support itself, the individuals involved, and then any external factors. This can require transformational change, that mindset and shifting, and it can be complicated, but it's not insurmountable. And I think that's something that people get a little concerned about, like, how difficult is this going to be? And it's really the learning leader's ability to influence that's critical in managing and leading that transformational change. And then personally, I just think that we are still maturing as a discipline. And Bob and Connor out there pounding the table, trying to, we have this alumni group. We're working on some other things to try to get it out there, but we really do need more rigorous research to share the best practices and things. What can you do? Well, you guys are, again, I'm preaching to the choir. This is a fun group to be with. You're part of the alumni group. So, if you're still learning, keep going to the conferences. Don't be shy, work your network. If you're experienced, please share your stories, best practices, do some research, get involved, and help the newcomers that, learning that people really need this network to help them get started. We can all be that network to help new people as they're getting into this work. I do have a takeaway, and Bob, I can send that to you, and you can somehow distribute it. It's really just the framework, the adoption framework that I have, and some questions that you should ask for each one of those categories. It might help you as you're thinking through that. So I'd be happy to share that with all of you. And that's it. Thank you for joining, and let's keep talking.
Excellent, Katie. Thank you so much. A lot of wonderful back channel going on in the chat. One question, Katie, people had is, does the choice of technology platform make a difference? Did you get anything from your interviews about their journey through that? Was there recommendations, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so lots of conversation about that. I mean, again, it came up that figuring out the methodology, like how to do it, was more important than the technology, but it's going to come up. And there were organizations that had a technology like an Ask Delphi or a Panviva or Intuitive in the past. They had a system like that, and that worked really well for their strategy. There were folks who were building, and I kid you not, they were building interactive PDFs using the pyramid that were very, very effective. And it was more of finding a place to put them in their internal tools for people to find them. And they had to work really hard for that, and the communications. We had organizations who, their organization's platform is SharePoint. And that's just what everybody knows. So they customize SharePoint to work for them, for their organization. And there's pros and cons to doing that, in terms of if SharePoint upgrades, then all of that has to be upgraded too, right? So there were many, many different examples of how people are using it. And I think the trick is really in your environment, figuring out what works for you. I mean, we're playing with that right now too, right? Most important to me is that they understand what it is and how to build it. How to, how many steps, how to break down a process into tasks and the steps, and how to create the right structures in the pyramid around that. That's really, really critical. And then figure out where's the best place to insert it. And so we will most likely have like a solution, a one-stop place for people to go, but we will also embed performance support in other areas that's really closer to the actual work, like the PowerPoint I was talking about. The McKinsey PowerPoint is now riddled with all types of performance support in there. And that was based off of another project that we did, the first project that we did actually a long time ago.
Awesome.
So I hope that helps.
Yep. Bad tools, great tools can make bad stuff.
Yep.
Right. I mean,
Yep.
it's one thing I love about the technology partners we have in this community. They all want, and part of why we enjoy them being in here so much is every one of them gets that they're probably the biggest downfall to their tool is bad design. Right. And so my mom always said, just because I have Word doesn't mean I'm a writer. And same with these kinds of technologies. So good stuff. Friends, any other questions for Katie or observations or comments relative to what you heard today that you're also going? Carrie says we are playing with 3 different tools. Carrie, do you want to speak to any of that, my friend? I see you're there.
Yeah, we started in a tool called Fusion where we created our own, and then we moved to SharePoint and saw some of kind of like the flaws in that. And now we're actually trying to create using a custom page inside of Cornerstone On Demand, so inside of an LMS. So we're kind of taking 3 different approaches at the moment. One thing that, if you don't mind if I ask a question that I put in chat, but it didn't get brought up, was we have leaders in our organization after seeing the digital coach really wondering, like, can we reorganize our knowledge management the way that we have knowledge management right now? So bringing the knowledge closer to the action, right, rather than burying it in folder upon folder in some system somewhere. And so I was wondering if that came up in anything that you talked about with any other organizations.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the organizations. Clearly, they have married knowledge management and the performance support together. I mean, they call their system the knowledge management tool, right? That's what they call it. So they did actually work on that. And it's funny, Carrie, because we're looking at that too. We're working on a solution right now where we have it's a methodology, right? And it's available in a system. And it's like, what do we do with it? Do we marry that with performance support? Because we don't want our learners to have to go to 2 different places. We don't want them to have to go to the methodology and to performance support. So we're working with them to figure that out. So yeah, that's a decision too. That's something that you have to work through.
So Carol said in the chat, is that related to the supporting resources? And that was what we were thinking we would do, is put it on the supporting knowledge tab would be how we would connect the 2. In terms of tabs, I don't know if everybody does it like that. That's just the way that we're approaching it. But
so that would be linking to resources that are in the knowledge management system. Yeah, absolutely. That is one way. And our word, it was really, do we combine this into one thing where we have the steps and processes in one system, and we link them to the supporting knowledge, correct? But we would get rid of the other knowledge system that we're using. It would just be the performance support solution that they would go to.
Correct. We're going after way number 2, not way number 1 that you described. Yeah.
Yeah, guys, it's funny because this is also, and Andy, I'm sorry, my friend, I do see your hand up. I'll get to you in a second. It's interesting, you guys, that this has reinitiated discussions around LMSs, LCMSs, content management systems, and of course, knowledge management as a discipline. A lot of us went through that in the 90s and that type of thing. And what we found was a lot of it was about knowledge collection and tagging and such that came with those disciplines, not so much about knowledge aggregation and the dissemination of those things in a structured and effective way. So these things grew into these amazing behemoths of content collecting, but the accessibility, point of need, 2 clicks, 10 seconds, pyramid stuff we've talked about was glaringly missing from a lot of those initiatives and even the early technologies. And it took a hit for a lot of folks. CAM took a hit in a lot of organizations, and probably an unfair one. I think it's a maturity thing as we've worked through this, but it's brought those discussions back that had gone to the wayside for quite a while. Andy, did you want to jump in there, my friend?
Yes, thanks, Bob. Yeah, so
Sure.
my question is around, I mean, my question for Katie and anyone else is I'm currently going to be working on a performance support tool through the project that I did in my 5 Moments of Need course.
Awesome.
We're actually going to be bringing it to fruition. So it's a great experiment. My organization is very receptive to performance support. We have a great organized we have a, I'll call it an organization-wide digital coach in our internal website, which has links to interactive toolkits and RISE courses, video, links to training. All of the content is there and accessible. The biggest challenge that I'm thinking about is what Bob touched on in his earlier comment, how to get to it. Like, the word I'm wrestling with is curation. I want to curate the right tools to get to the right people at the right time. My question is, how much of that is good curation versus the marketing piece of it? Like, there needs to be some sort of communication piece that rolls out to managers. For example, my topic is coaching, career coaching conversations. So within that, there's coaching, and we use the GROW model at Liberty Mutual. But within that is a subtopic of career coaching conversations, and that's where my performance support tool is. So I'm just thinking, one of the things I'm thinking about is what metrics should we use to assess pre-initiative, and what approaches should we take in terms of communicating this out? Do we go to managers of managers, communicate that out? Wondering your thoughts on that. And I know your research was across lots of industries. Does my question make any sense? Sorry.
I think so, and let me see if I'm off. So on the curation side, part of the methodology, you're going to find the right resources when you do your content analysis, right? So you're going to really pull the right things together and really look carefully at that, and don't overwhelm the system on that. We learned that the hard way, what I mean? Don't put too much in there. Find the right things, and then monitor the usage, as you go through it, because you'll start to see what's being touched and what's not being touched, right? So you can look at that. And the communication's really, really critical, how you do that. And I mean, it's almost kind of bottoms up as well. I mean, it's educating to the users who are going to use it. And again, I think embedding it somewhere in training where they actually have to touch it at some point. If they're in an onboarding of some, embedding it is really a powerful tool. I think then communicating it out, you are definitely, it's almost a pincer effect, right? You do the stuff with the learners, but then you do the stuff with the managers, and you hope that somewhere in the middle it works out. But I would definitely do the managers of these folks. And we had lots of examples of that, in rolling out performance support, making sure that the managers of the people who were going to receive it knew it was coming, and giving them kind of help in terms of how to position it, how to talk about it, how to help the learners kind of use it and access it, right? So that's really important. Another key piece, and I don't know if this fits, but somebody had talked about, we only communicated to the folks who were getting some performance support, being very careful. You don't want people to go into a system one time and there's nothing in there for them, and then they're completely turned off and they never go back again, right? So being careful as to who you communicate with and when. So I don't know, did that help, Andy? Was that kind of touching?
It does. The challenge with this is it might be an infrequent resource. It's at a touch point in someone's workflow. Career coaching conversations only happens at a certain stage in someone's work life. So there's the challenge of getting managers of managers to communicate it out to their frontline managers. There's another aspect. There's talent consultants at Liberty. They need to be aware of it so they can recommend and cross-sell, for lack of a better word. So there's that. And again, we have a really good environment of tools. It's the curation, and like you said, not overloading the system of it. I mean, in looking at, and I'm not solutioning here, but in our leap that we created, we really saw the only thing that we need to develop that hasn't been done is just a digital coach for the actual, okay, career coach conversations. There's no, right now, there's no document at Liberty that says, you want to have a career conversation, go here. But all those go here resources actually exist. So it's just a matter of the correct curation and with a combination of good marketing, communication, and rollout. But then we want to weigh the the pre-rollout evaluation versus post to measure the effectiveness and the impact on the business. Thank you for putting up with my fragmented thinking on this, because it's still in formation. So
no, it's awesome. And you guys don't, sometimes in your communication strategy, you have to have a different message for different stakeholders, so understand those you're speaking to. Sometimes I see organizations put together a blanket deck, and then that's kind of the one they use across the enterprise, be it a user or a manager or a senior manager. And there's often different, you can have, it can maybe be the 70-30 or 60-40 rule, but there are definitely things that resonate more for one than the other. And, I forget what the marketing research is, but, there's something about, we're 10 times more likely to buy something from a testimonial than a commercial, right? So once you start getting those early wins, get your users in front of people, and it can be anecdotal, but have them tell the story about, it's funny, guys, the conversation around ROI tends to go away when people are getting work done. It's almost like the ROI thing's a crutch to be like, well, how do we know if training's valuable? If they're looking for a reason to find out why training's valuable, it probably means that training may not be working in the first place, because we're trying to find a placebo thing to validate the effort. If you're getting performance results, share those out. And again, anecdotal, and a lot of anecdotal is data. So get people to tell their story, user to user, manager to manager, and those tend to be case studies, and user story tends to be really, really powerful. Good stuff, Andy. Really good question, friend. Any others for our expert? Comments, questions? There's a question about when your book's coming out, Katie.
Need a breather from the dissertation, then I'll get to the book, right? I want to talk to Con about that.
Well, and then, as you can imagine, she got swamped by the academic side of things about professoring and all that stuff, because it is really amazing, Katie, how little work there is in this area, right? I mean, that's the thing that I think that's why I was so excited when I heard you were heading this way in your dissertation and your work, because it fills such a remarkable gap of validating what we've all talked about in so many ways, and opening up new things that we did not see through the plethora of folks that you spoke to in your research. It's so badly needed, and Katie is going to help us head up some further research work that we're going to be intentional about in the community and elsewhere. Carrie.
That was actually the question that I wanted to ask, is if you were to pick, like, what would be the next research question you'd ask? What would it be? Like, what would you really want to see done next?
I think, well, it's funny. I think I've told Bob this, my professors kept really trying to, your dissertation isn't your life, right? It's supposed to be an exercise that demonstrates that you have the skills to do this kind of work. And so people get in and they want to do because I wanted to do a mixed method studies. I wanted to go out and send out these surveys to people. So I would like to do something to get a better sense on who's doing it and doing what. So I would love to do like a quantitative bit where we survey kind of the world through LinkedIn and other things to find out who's doing what. I think deeper research would be great on the back end of this. So I did the upfront piece on adoption, but now get into the learner part and really understand learner needs, what, the learner adoption of performance support would be really cool to kind of bring the whole thing forward. And I think we could learn a lot from that to really balance this out.
Katie, and I think downstream sustainment is a real important one. I mean, we have Molly Petrofan here, who built over 90 digital coaches in her work over years. And so, but that was her journey around how that came together and grew from a project to multiple projects to a dashboard of projects. It'd be interesting to understand the evolution of that, how to do it effectively, lessons learned around that, and so on. Katie, can I ask a question about maintenance, my friend? I'm really curious about maintenance. Did that rear its ugly head a lot with all they talked to, or did they feel they had their arms around it with governance, or anything about? You're laughing. Anything
Yeah,
about
when
that?
I said what are the biggest challenges, I think that was one of the number one things that came up. And I put it in my dissertation under resources, right? Because it's a strategy around it. And, there were lots of, different perspectives on, if we keep it in the learning team, we ensure that it happens and we ensure that it happens right, versus, okay, this is the business. I've helped this business unit set this up. I'm not going to even give them resources to do it until they commit to having someone in their business unit who maintains it. And then I'm going to police that a little bit to make sure that it's being done. So there were multiple kind of strategies for doing it. But yes, it did come up as a challenge, because we all know if this thing doesn't stay relevant, it loses its power, right? It loses, the ability to perform the results, and people won't go to it if it's not relevant or updated. So it is a big decision. But I think the lesson is, think about that up front. Don't wait. And as you're working with the different business units, talk to them about it and talk about who should, either you set a clear strategy in terms of who's going to own it from your learning organization perspective, or you talk to the business units about who's going to do that and how. And some, as I said, there were a couple that were really strong that said we wouldn't even engage until they committed to owning it in their unit and updating it. So.
Brilliant. Suma, I see your hand up, my friend. Question?
More of a comment about governance, and our L&D is huge on that. And some of the things we do for that is, one, we do have set aside some time at the end of the year to do audits. And that's what we do. We go and audit all our materials to make sure it's up to date. The other thing, so Katie, to your point, if you're handing it over to the business units, again, it depends on the tools you have, right? So in our case, for example, we have SharePoints. That's where we have some of that supporting knowledge links. And what we do is, when we are uploading it, we put an expiration date on that document. So whether they like it or not, come time of that expiration, they get a notification that they have to go look at it. So I just thought I'd just throw out some tips out there of what we do to handle that governance and making sure that materials are up to date.
Great.
Brilliant.
Yep.
And we've seen some also layer critical skills over that, right? Because if it's a 7, it better darn be current. But if it's a 1 or a 2, not that it's not important, we talk about the difference, right? But the reality is, can we keep everything current to the minute? Probably not. Right. So is there a way to do that reasonably, but also effectively, to your point, Katie, that, when people stumble on bad stuff, that can be hurtful in its usability and long-term success. So managing expectations, we've seen people put, like you said, expire by dates, or we saw one organization do a green, yellow, red kind of a coding. And that meant that, frankly, things that were red would be current within a day. Things that were yellow or green may have these kinds of things. And sometimes they'd also put the content owner in there, so people could check for currency and these kinds of things. But again, trying to set good expectations around the reality of how keeping these things, when they get huge, current, can really be a governance effort. Carrie.
It's sort of off from where we are now, but did anybody talk about scalability? Because that's one thing that I'm really dealing with right now in a very large organization, is how do we, because as soon as somebody sees it, and I try not to tell people about it, and you guys are like, hey, beat the drum, and I'm like, I can't beat the drum because people want it as soon as they see it. And so I'm actually more scared about scaling it and not over promising things than I am about the technology and things like that. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, there was, and Bob, you can talk about other examples, but one particular example, again, in this organization, they rolled it out, they delivered one, and then all of a sudden they got inundated with requests, and it was a small team of just a couple people. And so they had to take a step back, and they had to put, this is kind of governance, they had to put prioritization processes, intake processes, kind of, here's where you are in the mix kind of, process around it. So yeah, it does. Yeah, that does happen, Carrie. And Bob,
We
what
had-
have you?
Well, we had another organization that also layered on that the degree to which they would build this thing out. So they had prioritization, but they also had level of sophistication of the tool, frankly. And so, because everyone thinks their project's big and important, but the reality is, if you look at it through the lens, the unbiased lens of the organization and priorities and productivity and performance, they don't all that equal. So this organization also layered and said, look, here's the thing. If it's not a high priority critical thing, we will give it a linked PDF. That's kind of as sophisticated as we're going to get in version 1. If it is a life or death critical to the organization, the performance is really suffering in all these kinds of ways, that we will escalate to a digital coach as far as how much we build it out and how advanced the tool itself is. So this is a prioritization of the organization. And then, but then this woman also laid a prioritization of what would get built realistically and said, look, we just can't, everything can't be a digital coach. Everything can't be. And so they managed that expectation. But what she found was a lot of people, because they had nothing in many cases, this is so new to many organizations, that the linked PDF, frankly, was fine. Something was better than nothing. But then as the organization matured, and part of her underlying goal was funding, right? She wanted, as it got better and built more momentum, the tolerance for linked PDFs grew less. And she was like, well, okay, well, look, here's the deal. I don't have the money, resource, or the tool to skip that as an option. And it helped build her business case for going something bigger, but all journeys over time. Dr. Coates, we can't thank you enough for a remarkable kickoff to 2022. Friends, we are so excited about where this is going to go. This is just one example of what we hope this alumni group becomes to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. It's recorded. It will be on Teams. Also, many of the resources that Katie talked about that she showed, we can also put in our private team site for those of you that are, obviously all of you in the alumni. And you'll be hearing from us shortly about some of the exciting things we have for this year as we rev this up even further. Katie, thank you so much, friend, for your dedication and your work.
Thanks for letting
you.
me geek out a little bit this morning. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Hey,
Have a
great,
great
nice
day.
job, and congratulations on your good work.
Congratulations.
Thank you,
Good job.
everybody.
Thanks, friends. Be well, be safe. You'll hear from us soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.